Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let us return to our main character. The first time my daughter-in-law told me I didn't belong was 3 days before my son's wedding. I stood outside the rehearsal hall in Charleston, holding a neatly folded invitation that I had paid for every letter of it printed with money from the company I built. Madison looked straight through me, her smile as polished as the pearls around her neck. "Sorry, Mr. Callahan," she said sweetly. "This event is for important people only." The laughter that followed didn't hurt because it was cruel. It hurt because my own son laughed with her. I didn't say a word. I just nodded, turned around, and walked into the night. What they didn't know was that every light in that ballroom, every glass of champagne, and every luxury they bragged about existed because I allowed it. That night, while the city slept, I picked up my phone and made a single call. The air outside the Magnolia Grand was cold, the kind of southern winter chill that seeps through expensive suits and cheaper pride. I could still hear the band rehearsing inside violins, laughter, the clink of silverware, and the soft echo of my own footsteps fading into the parking lot. The valet looked at me with the same mix of confusion and pity that I'd seen too many times before. "Sir, are you not staying?" he asked quietly. I smiled faintly. "No," I said. "Apparently, I'm not important enough tonight." The truth was, I hadn't expected a red carpet. But I hadn't expected to be dismissed either. The invitation had come from Ethan a week earlier, written in his assistant's handwriting, unsigned. It was a small gesture, but I had thought it meant something. Maybe a chance to see my son before the ceremony. Maybe to hand him the pocket watch that once belonged to his grandfather. But standing there in the marble foyer, surrounded by people wearing my name on their paychecks, I realized I was just another relic of the past they wanted to hide. Madison's voice floated from behind me. "Oh, don't take it personally, Rick. You know how these events are tight guest lists." She smiled for the photographers, then whispered, "Just family and real investors." The word real landed like a knife. I'd spent 35 years building Callahan Estates from a two-man operation into one of Charleston's most respected construction firms. Real investors, I thought, staring at the chandelier I had once approved for installation. They had no idea that the ballroom's foundation was poured with my signature still on the blueprint. Ethan appeared beside her, immaculate in his tailored suit, his expression a blend of discomfort and pride. "Dad," he said softly, "Madison's just trying to keep things organized. It's her big weekend." I wanted to believe he meant it kindly. But his hand on her back told a different story. His loyalty was already claimed. "Sure," I said, keeping my voice calm. "You two enjoy your evening." The laughter behind me grew again as I walked away. But I didn't turn around. Inside my pocket was a small velvet box containing a gold ring, Linda's wedding band, the one Ethan had asked for when he was 16, saying he wanted to keep it for when he got married someday. I had carried it with me that night, thinking maybe he would want to wear it on his chain as a reminder of where he came from. Instead, I placed it gently on the reception desk and told the attendant, "Give this to my son after the dinner." As I stepped outside, the street lamps shimmered on wet pavement. Charleston smelled of salt and magnolia, the scent of memory and decay. My 2008 Cadillac waited at the curb, scratched, faded, but still mine. I opened the door and sat for a moment, staring at the glowing windows of the ballroom. I could see Madison twirling her white rehearsal dress, sparkling like money well spent. I'd once thought she was just ambitious. Now I saw she was strategic. The drive home took 20 minutes, but each traffic light seemed to last an hour. My mind replayed the scene again and again, the laughter, the cameras, Ethan's nervous smile. I remembered when I taught him how to drive on a dirt road outside Beaufort when he was 12 and thought I was the smartest man alive. "Dad, how do you always stay calm?" he had asked once. "Because calm men are dangerous," I'd said. "They're the ones who've already decided what comes next." I parked in front of my house, a modest brick colonial on the edge of town. The porch light flickered the same way it always did when the humidity climbed. Inside, the walls were lined with photographs, Ethan as a boy. Linda smiling beside me, company milestones framed under glass. On the mantel sat the original Callahan Estates charter, signed in 1988. The ink had faded, but my name still stood first. I poured myself a glass of bourbon and sat by the old mahogany desk that once served as my command center. The drawers still held contracts, deeds, and the corporate transfer papers Ethan had signed 2 years earlier when I'd stepped down as CEO and let him take over. He had insisted that it was time for new leadership. I'd agreed on one condition, that all final ownership and property rights remain under the Callahan Family Trust, of which I was the sole trustee. Ethan had never read the fine print. The phone buzzed on the desk, lighting up with notifications from the company's group chat. Pictures of the rehearsal dinner flooded the screen. Madison's laughter, Ethan's champagne toast captions filled with hashtags, Callahan Legacy, #Blessed Wedding, /Success Story. I set the phone down and exhaled slowly. Legacy, success. Words that had lost their meaning the moment they forgot who gave them their start. I opened the desk drawer and took out a worn leather folder. The original trust documentation, the same kind my father had left me decades ago. I flipped through the pages, tracing my initials beside every property deed. The beach house, the vineyard, the downtown offices. All of it still legally mine. For a moment I wondered if I was being petty. But then I remembered Madison's smirk, the laughter, the phrase, important people only. There was a time I might have swallowed that insult and moved on. But tonight, something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. The clock struck 11. Outside, a storm rolled in from the coast, thunder echoing like distant applause. I reached for the phone again and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I hadn't dialed in years, Lawson & Banks Private Wealth Management. The same firm that had handled the Callahan Family Trust since its creation. When the receptionist answered, her voice was sleepy but professional. Lawson & Banks After Hours line. "How may I assist you?" "This is Richard Callahan," I said evenly. "Account number ending in 4327. I need to review authorization access for Callahan Estates Holdings." There was a pause, then the sound of typing. "Yes, Mr. Callahan. Everything is still listed under your primary signature. Would you like to make any changes?" "Not yet," I replied. "But make sure no withdrawals or event payments are processed without my explicit approval." "Understood, sir." I hung up, set the phone down, and stared at the lightning flashing outside my window. The reflection in the glass showed a man with gray hair, tired eyes, and a calmness that felt dangerous again. They had laughed at me tonight, the old man who didn't belong. But in a few days, when the music started and the lights came up, they would learn that every spotlight in that hall still ran on my power. I leaned back in the chair, the bourbon warming my chest, and whispered to the empty room, "You wanted a wedding to remember Madison. Let's make sure you get one." The rain had stopped by morning, but the sky still looked bruised gray with streaks of gold trying to break through. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, the newspaper folded neatly in front of me. My reflection stared back from the dark window beside it, older and quieter than I remembered. On the front page of the Charleston Business Journal, my son and his fiancée smiled beneath a bold headline, "Next Generation Leadership, Callahan Estates embraces modern vision. Madison's photo dominated the page. She wore a tailored white suit, pearls shining at her collarbone, a hand on Ethan's arm. Beneath the image, the article praised her innovative approach to community projects and financial acumen that positioned Callahan Estates for the future. I skimmed until the last line. Under Ethan Callahan's dynamic direction and Madison Pierce's strategic insight, the company enters a new era of success. Not one word mentioned me. I set the newspaper aside and leaned back in my chair. The sound of the coffee maker dripped in the background, rhythmic and dull. The truth was, I didn't need recognition. I'd had more than enough applause in my time. What stung wasn't being forgotten, it was being erased. That morning I drove to the old workshop behind my house, the one I hadn't entered in years. Dust floated in the air like memory. My father's hammer still hung above the workbench, the wooden handle worn smooth from decades of use. I ran my fingers over the steel and whispered, "You'd have known what to do, old man." In the corner sat a wooden sign half covered by a tarp, "Callahan builds with integrity since 1988. I had made it myself the day I founded the company. Every nail, every brushstroke was a promise that the Callahan name would stand for honesty. Seeing it now felt like reading the obituary of something that hadn't died naturally, but had been buried alive. 15 years ago, I was just another builder with calloused hands and a stubborn dream. I'd worked sun up to sundown, poured concrete until my knuckles cracked. Linda, my wife then, had handled the paperwork in our kitchen, while Ethan, a boy of 8 colored houses, beside her on scrap blueprints. We built slowly, project by project, until the city started calling us by name, Callahan Estates. It wasn't just business. It was blood and sweat turned into brick and steel. When Ethan graduated with his MBA, I thought it was the proudest day of my life. He walked across that stage like he owned the future. I handed him a silver pen engraved with the words, "Build something real." I believed he would. Then Madison Pierce entered the picture. She came from the kind of family that believed the world owed them front row seats to everything. Her father, a retired senator, had friends in every corner of Charleston's upper circles. Her smile could light up a boardroom, but it could also burn through anyone who didn't fit her image of success. Ethan fell for her in weeks. At first, I tried to like her. I even invited her to dinner, served her the same steak I'd cooked for every family milestone. But when she looked around my modest dining room, I saw something flicker behind her polite smile, a calculation. To her, I wasn't family. I was background. When Ethan asked me to step down as CEO 2 years ago, I didn't fight him. "It's time for new leadership," he said, using Madison's words. "You've earned some peace, Dad. Let me carry it from here." I agreed on one condition, that all ownership rights and property titles remain under the Callahan Family Trust, a structure my father had set up decades earlier. Ethan had nodded without reading the fine print. I wasn't trying to trick him. I was protecting him from himself. That night I signed the transfer documents with Clara Jenkins, my accountant of 20 years, watching closely. "You're sure about this?" she'd asked. "You'll still hold control through the trust, but they won't know unless you tell them." "I'm sure," I said. "One day he'll understand." Now, years later, Clara was the only person who still called me Mr. Callahan with respect. She'd been sending quiet updates, financial reports, asset lists, things I should have ignored, but didn't. Last month, she'd mentioned a rumor about Ethan and Madison planning to sell one of our historic office buildings downtown. "They're calling it a rebranding opportunity," she'd said over the phone. "But it looks like they're moving assets around to make Madison a partner." I'd stayed silent then, though. Something inside me had shifted. That afternoon, I called her again. She answered on the second ring. "I figured you'd call today," she said. "You heard about the wedding rehearsal everyone has?" Madison made sure of it. "I need to know what's really happening with the accounts." She sighed. Rick, they're consolidating funds from several project lines into one joint investment account. It's under Callahan and Pierce Developments. Pierce. I repeated the word bitter in my mouth. My father would turn in his grave. There's more, Clara continued. They've been negotiating a merger with a private equity firm out of Atlanta. The deal's not official yet, but the paperwork's ready to go right after the wedding. So they're planning to sell my father's name before they even say, "I do." I'm afraid so. But remember, they can't finalize without your signature. I leaned back in my chair and let out a quiet laugh, then let them plan their merger. They'll find out soon enough whose ink they need. That evening, I sat in my study surrounded by old photographs. Ethan's childhood drawings, Linda's framed smile from years gone by my father's black and white portrait watching from the wall. I thought about what I'd built, what I'd lost, and what I was still protecting. Maybe my mistake wasn't giving Ethan too little. Maybe it was giving him too much, too soon. I had wanted him to have what I never did, comfort, status, security. I'd given him all of it, and in return, he'd forgotten where it came from. There's a particular ache only a father knows watching his child believe that love and sacrifice are entitlements. I whispered to the empty room. I taught him how to build a company. I should have taught him how to build a conscience. Night came quietly. Rain started again, soft against the window panes. I poured myself a bourbon and stared at the folder of financial documents Clara had sent me earlier that week. There it was, proof of everything. Madison's designer invoices filed as corporate expenses. The venue deposit paid through the company card. A string of transfers marked event consulting fees. They weren't just stealing money. They were stealing meaning. My phone buzzed with a message from Clara. "Everything you need is ready. Just say the word when you want me to act." I stared at the message for a long time, the glow of the screen reflecting off the brown leather portfolio on my desk, the same one I'd carried to every major deal of my life. I opened it, slowly, ran my fingers across the first page of the trust document, and felt the calm certainty that only comes after pain has burned itself out. Outside, thunder rolled across the bay, echoing through the night. I closed the folder, turned off the light, and whispered into the dark. They think the old man's finished. Let's remind them who taught them how to build. When I finally went to bed, I didn't dream of revenge. I dreamed of concrete drying, slow, steady, unshakable. Because tomorrow, it would be time to pour a new foundation. I arrived at the downtown headquarters just before noon, the city buzzing under a cloudless sky. The mirrored glass of the Callahan and Pierce Tower reflected everything except its own truth. For years, this building had been my pride, a monument to sweat and stubbornness. Now it was a stranger with my name scraped off the front. The new brass letters gleamed above the revolving doors, Callahan and Pierce Developments. Inside, the lobby smelled of polished marble and cold ambition. A young receptionist, probably no older than 22, looked up as I entered us. Her voice was professional but uncertain. "Good morning, sir." "Do you have an appointment?" I smiled faintly. "No, but I built the place, so I figured I'd stop by." She blinked, unsure whether I was joking. "Do you mean you're a contractor, something like that?" I said. The lobby had changed. Where framed photographs of our first projects once hung houses, schools, parks, there were now abstract paintings and glossy magazine covers featuring Madison and Ethan. Their faces smiled from the walls like a brand new dynasty. The elevator ride to the top floor felt longer than it used to. The numbers glowed up the panel one by one, and with each light, a memory rose with it. The day we opened our first office, the night I worked until dawn, drafting plans by hand, the morning Ethan brought me coffee and called me my hero. When the doors opened, I stepped into a space that no longer smelled of blueprints and sawdust, but perfume and money. Madison had redesigned everything. White leather chrome accents, a wall of awards I'd never heard of. At the far end, a glass door bore the gold letters CEO, Ethan Callahan. Through the glass, I saw my son at his desk, leaning back in a chair I had once bought for myself. Madison sat beside him, crossing her legs gracefully, phone pressed to her ear. They both looked powerful, beautiful, and untouchable. Ethan noticed me first. His surprise flickered for a moment before he composed himself. "Dad." I stepped inside, ignoring Madison's disapproving glance. "Don't get up. I just wanted to see how the house I built is holding up." Madison lowered her phone. "Rick, it's not a good time. We're in the middle of finalizing next quarter's projections." I looked around. Funny. The projections seemed to have shifted in design, too. No more family photos, no more history. Ethan gave a small laugh, the nervous kind. Madison thought a cleaner aesthetic would appeal to investors. "Investors," I repeated, tasting the word. "Of course." Madison smiled in that way she did when she wanted to end a conversation without saying so. "We've been modernizing, Rick. Bringing Callahan Estates into the 21st century. You should be proud." "I'm sure I will be," I said quietly, "once I figure out who owns it." She frowned slightly. "Excuse me?" Ethan stood, his tone gentle but defensive. "Dad, please. Don't start that. Start what I asked. Asking who's signing my family's name to partnership contracts I didn't approve. Who authorized changing the company's legal name? Who's turning a legacy into a brand?" Ethan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Dad, you retired? This is our vision now." I nodded slowly, my jaw tight. A vision built on my foundation. Don't forget that. Madison leaned back in her chair, calm and poised. "Rick, no one's trying to erase you. We're just evolving. Evolution doesn't happen by cutting out your roots," I said. "It happens when you grow from them." Her smile hardened. "Well, maybe the roots got tired." I stared at her for a moment, the kind of stare that makes silence louder than shouting. "Be careful, Madison. Roots might be buried, but they still hold up the tree." I left without another word, walking down the corridor lined with glass and ego. Employees passed me in the hallway, offering awkward smiles, half pity, half respect. They knew who I was. They just didn't know if they were allowed to acknowledge it. Outside, the sunlight felt too bright. I stopped on the sidewalk and looked up at the tower again. For the first time, I saw it clearly, not as something I'd built, but as something I'd let drift away. That night, Clara called. "They're moving fast, Rick," she said. "You were right. The paperwork for that Atlanta merger is nearly finished. They plan to announce it at the wedding reception next week." I sat in my study, the city glowing outside the window. "And the assets still under the trust. They can't close the deal without your authorization." "Good," I said. "Let them celebrate their success a little longer." Clara hesitated. "Are you sure you want to play it this way? It's going to be public. Messy." I looked at the old blueprint on my wall, the first Callahan Estates project, hand-drawn in pencil, the lines uneven but full of heart. They made it public when they took credit for what wasn't theirs. "I'm just correcting the record." "Rick," she said softly, "you know this could destroy Ethan's reputation." I was quiet for a long moment. Maybe that's what it takes to rebuild it. After hanging up, I opened the safe in the corner of my office. Inside were 3 folders, the family trust deed, the corporate ownership records, and the property titles for every major site we'd developed. I laid them out on my desk one by one. Each document had my signature, dated, witnessed, and sealed. The paper smelled of ink and time. It was proof of everything, the invisible framework beneath all their illusions. As I reviewed the papers, a memory surfaced. My father's voice on the night I first took over the company: "Never build anything you're not willing to defend." I hadn't realized until now how literal that advice would become. Later that night, I found a letter tucked away in an old folder. The handwriting was my father's faded, strong familiar. "Rick," it began, "if you ever find yourself questioning your family, remember this: wealth can build walls, but wisdom builds bridges. The choice is always yours." I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into the front of my portfolio. My father had believed in legacy more than profit. So did I. But legacy had to be protected from those who mistook inheritance for entitlement. The next morning, I met Clara at a small cafe by the harbor. She looked around before sitting down. I brought copies of everything she whispered, sliding a folder across the table. "Any updates?" I asked. "Madison's been funneling company funds into a new entity, her own consulting firm. Ethan either doesn't know or doesn't want to." I nodded slowly. "She's clever. I'll give her that." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to let her finish her masterpiece," I said. "Every artist deserves to sign their work before the critics arrive." Clara frowned. "You're planning something." "Not planning," I said, stirring my coffee. "Preparing." Outside, the harbor shimmered under the sun. The city was alive again, unaware that its skyline, its condos, its neighborhoods, all of it still belonged to one man sitting quietly at a cafe table. When Clara left, I stayed behind for a while, watching gulls drift over the water. I thought about Ethan, his laughter as a boy, his determination to impress me, his gradual transformation into someone I barely recognized. I didn't hate him. I pitied him. He was still learning what it meant to stand on his own. I whispered under my breath, "You'll thank me one day, son. Not today, but one day." As I walked back to my car, I felt something new stirring. Not anger, not pride, but purpose. For the first time in years, my steps felt steady. I wasn't walking away from my legacy anymore. I was walking toward it. At home, I placed the portfolio on my desk and opened it one more time. The trust documents rested neatly inside, the ink dark and certain. I traced my name with one finger and exhaled. "They can build whatever illusions they want," I murmured. "But the foundation will always be mine." Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, a storm forming over the harbor again. I smiled at the sound. Maybe storms were inevitable in this family. Maybe that's how Callahans built their strength, by learning to stand in the rain without flinching. I turned off the light and left the room, the portfolio waiting on the desk like a promise. The next time I opened it, the world would know the truth about the company and about the man they'd mistaken for finished. The chandeliers glowed like captured stars above the ballroom of the Charleston Country Club. 1,000 flickers of light danced over silver cutlery and crystal glasses, reflecting the kind of wealth that never tasted earned. I arrived quietly, holding the embossed invitation Ethan had sent weeks ago, though I knew it was more of a courtesy than a welcome. The valet took my keys with the expression of someone who wasn't sure whether my old Cadillac belonged in that line of European cars. Inside, the music was elegant violins, a grand piano, the murmur of laughter woven between clinks of champagne. The place looked familiar, though newer, colder. I had financed the first renovation 10 years earlier when Callahan Estates became a sponsor of the country club's annual fundraiser. I used to stand here shaking hands with men who respected me. Tonight, I was just another name on the guest list. My seat was near the back, behind a column far from the head table where Madison glowed in her designer dress. Her diamonds caught every light in the room. She laughed at something one of her bridesmaids whispered, the kind of laugh meant to be overheard. Ethan sat beside her, proud, oblivious, and completely unaware of how small he looked next to her calculated grace. My name card read, Mr. R. Callahan Guest, not father of the groom. I sipped the wine they placed in front of me and scanned the crowd. The tables were filled with Charleston's polished elite investors, realtors, politicians, all eager to toast the new generation of Callahan leadership. I heard my son's name repeated often, followed by Madison's in the same breath. Together, they were the city's favorite story youth money ambition. No one remembered the man who built the ground they stood on. The master of ceremonies took the microphone and introduced Madison, who rose gracefully, a vision of power disguised as sweetness. Tonight she began her voice, honeyed. We celebrate not just love, but legacy, the merging of two families who share the same vision for the future. Applause. The words legacy and vision rang in my ears like sirens. I sat still, hands folded. She continued listing her parents' contributions, her sponsors, her bridal team, even the investors who had believed in Callahan and Pierce from the beginning. Every name but mine. Someone at the next table leaned toward her, half joking. What about the father of the groom? Madison smiled politely. Oh, he's here somewhere, she said, waving a hand dismissively. But tonight is for the people who built this future. Laughter followed, polite but cutting. I felt it land like a blade. Ethan didn't stop her. He smiled, lifted his glass, and looked away. I stayed still. I'd learned long ago that silence could be louder than any argument. When the toasts ended, waiters began serving the next course. I felt a hand on my shoulder. Ethan stood beside me, shifting awkwardly. Dad, Madison didn't mean it that way. She said exactly what she meant, I replied quietly. He sighed. Please just let it go. She's stressed. It's her big night. I studied his face, so young, so desperate to please everyone but himself. You know, I said softly, I've spent my whole life making sure you never had to feel embarrassed. Funny how that balance changes. He blinked, then walked away. Across the room, Madison had begun another speech, this one impromptu, thanking her mentors and partners. Her words painted Ethan as the golden son of modern business. The crowd adored her confidence. She glanced my way once, just once, and smiled that perfect smile of triumph. I noticed the gift box in my hand, small and simple. Inside was my father's pocket watch, engraved with 3 words, "Honor builds forever." I'd planned to give it to Ethan tonight, a quiet gesture of blessing. I walked toward the head table. Madison turned, spotting me. Her expression didn't change, but her tone did. Oh, Rick, could you drop gifts at the reception desk? The photographer's setting up. Her voice was syrup, but the message was steel. She said it loud enough for nearby guests to hear. A ripple of laughter followed, half polite, half cruel. I nodded once and placed the box gently on the table beside her wine glass. It won't take up much space, I said. Then I turned toward the bar. The bartender, a man I'd known for years, poured a whiskey without asking. On the house, Mr. Callahan. I took it with a small smile. It's always on the house, I said. They just forgot whose house it is. I sat there, sipping slowly, letting the burn steady me. The room around me sparkled with everything I'd paid for: the chandeliers, the marble floors, the stage, even the gold trim on the chairs. All of it bore invisible fingerprints that no one could see but me. Richard Callahan, sitting alone at his own table, came a voice behind me. I turned to see Eleanor Hartwell. She was older now, her hair silver, her eyes still sharp enough to cut through pretense. She'd been a friend of my father's, a woman who remembered the kind of Charleston that existed before plastic smiles and PR headlines. Mrs. Hartwell, I said, standing. You haven't changed. Neither have you, she said. Still the quiet one in the room, full of fools. I chuckled. Quiet suits me these days. She leaned closer, her tone low. They've forgotten who built their ladders, Rick. But ladders have a way of collapsing when people start kicking the bottom rungs. I raised my glass slightly. Maybe it's time they learn that. Her eyes twinkled. I always liked your father's brand of justice. subtle, devastating, and well-timed. The orchestra started playing a soft tune. Madison stepped to the microphone again. "Before we end tonight, I'd like a family photo," she said. "Just immediate family, please." Eleanor glanced at me knowingly. Madison gestured for her bridesmaids, her parents, Ethan's mother and stepfather. When I started walking toward the group, she lifted her manicured hand. "Sorry, Rick," she said sweetly. "This is for important people only." The words hung in the air. Laughter followed, sharp and nervous. My son froze, caught between me and her, between guilt and weakness. For a second, everything in me wanted to speak, to remind them who financed their important lives, who made this room possible. But then I saw my reflection in one of the gold-rimmed mirrors across the hall. Gray hair, steady eyes, a man past his anger. I simply nodded. Of course. The photographer's flash went off as I turned away. Eleanor's gaze followed me. I could feel the weight of every whisper, every smirk, as I passed through the tables. But their laughter sounded hollow now, like glass ready to crack. Outside, the night air was cool and clean, free of perfume and pretense. Fireworks bloomed over the golf course in the distance, celebrating a future that wasn't theirs to keep. I walked slowly toward the parking lot, my shoes crunching on gravel. From the open doors behind me, I could still hear Madison's laughter, bright, rehearsed, empty. I let it echo behind me like a memory I no longer wanted to carry. At my car, I paused, hand on the door, and looked back one last time. The ballroom lights glowed through the windows, a golden cage for people who mistook glitter for greatness. I whispered into the night. They wanted a wedding they'd never forget. They'll get one. Then I got into my Cadillac, turned the key, and drove off into the dark. The road stretched ahead, silent and certain. In the mirror, the country club shrank into nothing but a faint glow behind me. The laughter faded first, then the music, then everything else. By the time I reached the end of the drive, all that remained was the sound of the engine and the promise of tomorrow. The rain returned before I even reached the highway. It came in slow sheets, tapping the windshield, like a metronome keeping time with my thoughts. Charleston at night glowed faintly through the mist, streetlights blurred into amber smudges, reflections trembling in the puddles. I didn't turn on the radio. Silence had always been better company. There's a kind of quiet that comes after humiliation. It isn't the quiet of defeat, it's the silence that happens when the anger finally freezes into something sharp and deliberate. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about how easily respect can disappear when you stop demanding it. The road curved along the bay, the same road I used to drive with Ethan when he was a teenager. He'd sit in the passenger seat, feet on the dashboard, talking about dreams bigger than our company, bigger than Charleston itself. He used to look at me like I was indestructible. I wondered when that look had changed to embarrassment. Maybe the first time Madison called me old-fashioned at a dinner party and he didn't defend me. Maybe earlier than that. I pulled over at an overlook by the water. The city shimmered on the horizon, a skyline I had literally built. Half those towers had my name on the foundation permits, though no one reading the plaques would ever know. I rolled down the window, letting the damp air hit my face. The smell of salt and rain was familiar grounding. Comfort without effort breeds arrogance, I muttered to myself. My father's words. He used to say it whenever I complained about hard work. I'd forgotten how true it was until I saw it reflected in my own son's eyes. I closed my eyes and saw Madison smirk again, heard the polite laughter, the phrase that still rang in my head, important people only. She didn't realize she'd given me a gift that night, a reminder. The drive home was slow, the wipers keeping rhythm with the hum of the engine. I passed neighborhoods I had designed 20 years ago, rows of houses still standing, still proud, built on the kind of integrity no one puts in brochures anymore. I'd always believed in permanence, in things that lasted. But respect wasn't concrete. It had to be rebuilt every day. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the porch light flickered on automatically. The house looked tired, but honest. Inside, the air smelled faintly of oak and old bourbon. I hung my jacket, poured myself a drink, and sat in my study surrounded by memories that still had weight. The leather portfolio lay open on the desk, its contents spread out like a map of my life: trust deeds, property titles, corporate ownership certificates. My name was on every page in faded blue ink, proof that the empire Madison bragged about had never been hers to command. I took a long sip of bourbon and dialed Clara. She answered almost immediately. "I figured I'd hear from you tonight," she said. They crossed the line. "They've been crossing it for months," she replied. "You just finally looked up." I let out a dry laugh. "You sound like my conscience." "I'm your accountant," she said. "Same thing half the time. What's the status of the trust accounts? Still secure? You hold all final authority. They can't move a dollar without your consent." I stared at the rain sliding down the window. "Then tomorrow we remind them who signs the checks." There was a pause on the line. "You're really going to do it?" I gave them everything I said quietly. Now they'll learn what it means to lose it. Clara sighed. "You always play the long game, Rick. Just be careful people like Madison don't go down quietly." "Let her scream," I said. "No one listens to noise for long." When I hung up, the clock on the wall read nearly midnight. I pulled the portfolio closer, turning page after page until I found the trust clause my father had insisted we keep. "The trustee shall have sole discretion over all distributions in accordance with moral character, gratitude, and responsibility of the beneficiaries." I read the line 3 times. My father had known exactly what he was doing when he wrote it. The law wasn't just on my side, it was my inheritance. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room. On the desk sat a framed photo of Ethan at 10 years old, wearing a construction helmet 2 sizes too big, grinning as he held a blueprint upside down. I picked it up and stared at it for a long time. "What happened to you, kid?" I whispered. Maybe the better question was, what happened to me? I'd stopped holding him accountable. I'd confused generosity with love, silence with patience. I'd let him forget the difference between pride and arrogance. For a moment, I felt the doubt creep in. Was I doing this to teach him or to hurt him? Would this break him or save him? But then I remembered Madison's tone when she dismissed me from that photo, her laughter echoing like applause for a performance that had cost me my dignity. No, this wasn't about vengeance. This was about restoring balance. I placed the photo back on the desk and reached for the landline phone beside the lamp. The number to Lawson and Banks was already written on a notepad, circled twice. I hovered my finger over the first digit, hesitating for the briefest second. Then I dialed. A crisp voice answered. "Lawson and Banks, Private Wealth Management." "This is Patricia. This is Richard Callahan," I said evenly. "Account number ending in 4327. "Yes, Mr. Callahan. How may I assist you? I want to place a temporary freeze on all discretionary distributions connected to Callahan Estates Holdings, effective immediately." "Understood, sir. Would you like to include subsidiary accounts tied to event or partnership payments?" "All of them," I said. "No withdrawals, no transactions without my direct approval." Patricia hesitated. "That will affect active contracts, including scheduled events." "I'm aware," I replied. "Confirm when it's done." "Yes, sir." I ended the call and sat back, the faint hum of the storm filling the silence that followed. It was done. A single instruction had shifted the ground beneath their feet. The bourbon glass felt heavier now, or maybe my hand was just tired. I walked to the window and watched the rain slow to a drizzle. Somewhere downtown, the wedding planners were probably finalizing the last details, flowers, lights, catering. All of it paid for by money they didn't own. I thought of Madison's laughter again, of Ethan's uneasy silence. By morning, the world they built on illusion would start to crack. Still, a small ache twisted in my chest. I didn't want to destroy my son. I wanted him to remember who he was before she rewrote his story, before success became the measure of his worth. I poured the rest of my bourbon down the sink and stood for a while in the quiet kitchen. The storm was clearing, and the air smelled new again. On my way to bed, I paused by the study door and looked back at the portfolio lying open on the desk. The documents caught the faint glow of the streetlight through the blinds, a thin golden line running across the word trust. Important people only, I said under my breath. We'll see how important they feel when the lights go out. Then I turned off the lamp. The house fell into darkness, calm and absolute. Outside, the last drops of rain hit the porch roof like a steady drumbeat, marking the end of one storm and the beginning of another. The sun was barely up when I woke. The house was quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock in the hallway. I poured myself a coffee and walked into the study. The papers from last night still lay spread across the desk, the brown leather portfolio open like an invitation. My phone buzzed once. A text from Lawson & Banks flashed across the screen. Freeze executed at 7:12 a.m. No further transactions authorized. I set the phone down, feeling the calm settle over me. Outside Charleston was beginning its day, unaware that one phone call had shifted the balance of an empire. I leaned back in the chair and watched sunlight crawl across the documents. It was done. The foundation was intact. The house they'd built on it, however, was about to collapse. Across town, Madison and Ethan were probably waking to the chaos I had quietly set in motion. I could imagine the flurry of calls, the confusion, the disbelief that their money had suddenly stopped moving. I wondered how long it would take before the first call came. By the time I finished my coffee, it had. Clara's name appeared on the screen. "It's starting, Rick," she said. "I've had 3 calls already, Ethan, Madison, and their event planner. They're all trying to figure out why the accounts are frozen." "Tell them it's a compliance audit," I said. "Nothing lies like the truth." She chuckled softly. "You sure about this? I gave them 10 years of comfort," I replied. "Now they can try a day of reality." When I hung up, I drove into town. The air was heavy with humidity, and the magnolia trees drooped under the weight of their own perfume. Every traffic light, every corner of this city held something I had built. The irony wasn't lost on me that they could live so comfortably in a world I'd constructed and still believe they owned it. At the Charleston Country Club, the chaos had already begun. The parking lot was half full, but the staff were running in and out of the front doors like ants from a flooded hill. I stayed in my car across the street watching. The event coordinator paced the entryway, a phone pressed to her ear. Inside, I could see the faint blur of white fabric Madison in her bridal robe, surrounded by bridesmaids. She was on the phone too, her smile tight, her voice rising. A man in a suit, Ethan, probably walked behind her, gesturing wildly. I didn't need to hear them to know the words. Try another card. Call the accountant. This can't be happening. It was happening. The florist's van left first angry and empty. Then the catering truck. Guests began arriving early, only to find staff whispering in corners. The air around the building shifted from excitement to embarrassment, the kind that spreads faster than rumor. I rolled down my window and let the morning air in. The scent of magnolias was thick and sweet. My phone rang again. "Clara." "They're panicking," she said. "Ethan called twice. Madison once. She's threatening to sue the bank." "Tell the bank to remind her she's not a client," I said. "Do you want me to tell them it was your order?" "No," I said. "Not yet. Let the silence speak first." At the venue, Madison's voice carried even through the closed doors. "This is ridiculous. My father will handle it. I'll have this fixed in an hour." The event manager tried to calm her. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but the funds for your booking have been declined. We'll need a new payment method." "My husband is the CEO," she snapped. "He controls those accounts." The manager's tone was polite but firm. "Legally, the trustee still has full authority. Mr. Richard Callahan." For a moment, even from the car, I could see the stillness that followed. A frozen beat in time where her face turned pale and her confidence cracked. I turned the key in the ignition and drove away, leaving them to the mess they had made. Halfway home, my phone rang again. Ethan this time. "Dad, what the hell is going on?" His voice was tense, bordering on panic. "Morning, son," I said calmly. "The bank says the accounts are frozen. Did you do this?" "I did," I said. "Consider it an early wedding gift." "Dad, this isn't funny. You can't just—" "I can, and I did. People are asking questions. Mom's furious. Madison's losing it. This is going to ruin everything." "Then it's a good lesson," I said. "Dad, please," he said, his voice breaking into frustration. "You can't humiliate us like this." "I didn't humiliate you," I said quietly. "You did that yourselves." He started to say something else, but I ended the call. Back home, I sat on the porch and watched the sky darken as clouds rolled in again. The weather seemed to know what kind of day it was going to be. I poured myself another cup of coffee and waited. The third call came from Madison. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Her tone was sharp, every word clipped. "What did you do?" "I executed my rights as trustee," I said. "You should read the documents before you start making speeches about important people." "You can't do this," she hissed. "Everything's already set up. The vendors, the guests, the reporters." "I warned you once, Madison," I said, cutting her off. "Respect is earned, not bought. You built your kingdom on borrowed bricks. Now it's time to see how it stands without the mortar." There was silence, then a trembling laugh. "You think this makes you look powerful? It makes you look pathetic. Everyone will know you're just bitter and jealous." "Then let them," I said, and hung up. Minutes later, my phone buzzed again. Lawson and Banks. Patricia's voice was calm, professional. "Mr. Callahan, just confirming your instructions. Multiple parties attempted to override your authorization this morning." "I assume you denied them," I said. "Of course." "All transactions remain suspended." "Good. Add a note to the account. Distributions paused, pending review of character and gratitude." There was a brief pause. "Very well, sir," she said. "That's quite specific." "It's quite accurate," I replied. By afternoon, the calls had stopped. I turned on the TV out of habit, flipping through channels until the local news caught my eye. The anchor spoke in her practiced tone. "Sources confirm that financial complications have delayed the Callahan-Pierce wedding this morning. Representatives declined to comment, though speculation points to internal family matters." I turned off the television. No need to hear what I already knew. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky and rain began again, heavy and relentless. I sat by the window watching the downpour blur the garden. Every flash of lightning illuminated the portrait of my father above the mantel, stern, unbending, proud. He would have approved. Not the revenge, but the lesson. By evening, Charleston was buzzing with gossip. People loved a scandal more than a story of success. The Callahan wedding disaster was already trending online. I could picture Madison scrolling through the headlines, her perfect image dissolving with every comment. I didn't smile. There was no satisfaction in it, only inevitability. You can't build truth out of lies, and you can't build loyalty out of vanity. The phone rang one last time that night. Ethan again. I let it ring twice before picking up. "Dad," he said softly, voice hoarse. "I know you're trying to teach me something. I just don't understand what it is." I looked at the rain streaking down the glass. "You will," I said. "When everything you've built starts to fall, that's when you see what still stands." He didn't reply. I hung up, turned off the lights, and sat in the dark, listening to the rain. The storm outside had finally reached the city, and with it came the sound of something breaking, soft, inevitable cleansing. By morning, the world would be different. The kingdom they'd built on borrowed pride would be rubble. And out of that ruin, maybe, just maybe, something real could grow again. By sunrise, Charleston was already buzzing with whispers. The city never slept through scandal, and the Callahan name was on every tongue. The Charleston Gazette headline read, "Callahan Wedding Halted." Amid financial confusion, millions in assets frozen. I didn't need to buy a copy. Clara texted me a picture of the front page before I'd finished my coffee. I read it once, then folded the newspaper neatly beside my cup. The article was fair, factual, almost respectful. Sources confirmed that the funds associated with Callahan Estates have been temporarily restricted by trustee authority. They didn't mention my name, but they didn't have to. Everyone in Charleston knew who the trustee was. Outside my window, the morning light poured through the clouds in thin ribbons, cutting across the wood floors of my study. I leaned back, sipping slowly, listening to the steady hum of the world rebuilding itself after a storm. Revenge wasn't supposed to feel peaceful, but this wasn't revenge anymore. It was balance. Meanwhile, at the country club, the wedding had turned into a circus. Madison's voice had carried through every marble hallway the day before. I heard the stories already, guests leaving early, vendors pulling out the bride, screaming that important people don't get treated like this. But she wasn't important anymore. Not in the ways that mattered. I set down my coffee just as Clara called. "They're everywhere," she said without greeting. "Reporters, vendors, even the caterers. Everyone's talking about how the wedding fell apart. Apparently Madison threw her bouquet at the florist." I chuckled quietly. "Expensive, aim." "She's blaming you publicly," Clara continued. "She called a few journalists. Says you sabotaged the family. But most people aren't buying it. They're saying you just reminded them who owns what." "That's all I ever did," I said. Clara's voice softened. "Rick, you've become a local legend overnight. Half the city thinks you're ruthless. The other half thinks you're a saint." "I'm neither," I said. "Just a man who finally stopped apologizing." She hesitated. "There's something else. Ethan called me this morning. He wants to meet. We're at the construction site on King Street. Says it's urgent." "I'll be there in an hour," I said, hanging up. When I arrived, the site was muddy from rain, the smell of fresh cement heavy in the air. Workers moved slowly under gray clouds. Ethan stood near the foundation, still in his wrinkled suit from yesterday, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. He looked exhausted, like a man who'd aged 10 years overnight. He turned when he saw me. "Dad." "Ethan." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of saws and hammers filled the silence between us. "You could have warned me," he finally said. "I did," I replied. "You just weren't listening." He ran a hand through his hair. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Madison's in shambles. Reporters are outside our house. The company board's demanding answers." "Good," I said. "Maybe they'll finally start asking the right questions." "Don't do that," he said sharply. "Don't act like this was some noble lesson. You humiliated us." "No," I said quietly. "You humiliated yourself when you let her treat me like a stranger." Ethan exhaled shakily, the fight draining from his posture. "I didn't mean for it to go that far." "You never mean it," I said. That's the problem. He looked down at the mud. I thought you were done with this life, Dad. You told me you wanted peace. I wanted peace, I said. You gave me silence. He met my eyes for the first time, something fragile in his voice. I wanted to make you proud. You can't make me proud with borrowed success, I said. I built this company with my hands, Ethan. I poured the concrete myself. You built nothing. You just decorated the walls. His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. I could see understanding dawning, slow, painful, but real. I'll fix this, he said quietly. I'll talk to Madison. We'll set the record straight. No, I said. You'll let the record stand. The truth doesn't need editing. He looked like he wanted to say something else. But instead he nodded once and walked away, shoes sinking into the wet ground. I watched him go, the wind whipping through his hair, his back straighter than before. For the first time in years, I saw a glimpse of the boy I'd raised, the one who used to draw blueprints beside me, the one who still knew the value of work. Later that afternoon, Clara called again. Rick Madison just tried to access the office accounts. I assume she failed. She did, Clara said. But she made a scene. Security had to escort her out. Cameras caught the whole thing. Let them, I said. Maybe it'll finally show people who she really is. Clara hesitated. You sure this isn't going too far? She built her image on my name, I said. Now she can rebuild her reputation without it. By evening, the headlines had shifted. Bride accused of misusing company funds. Sources confirm Madison Pierce's unauthorized access attempt. I sat on my porch watching lightning flicker in the distance. The city was eating its own story now. Every talk show host, every gossip site, every business column, they all wanted to know. The same thing: who was really in control of Callahan Estates? The answer was simple. Always had been. Linda called just before sunset. Rick, it's chaos over here, she said, her voice trembling. Madison's hysterical. Her parents are threatening to sue you. They can try, I said. Ethan's trying to calm them down, but they're saying you planned this for months. I planned it the day she called me irrelevant. She was quiet for a moment. You could end it now, Rick. One phone call and this whole thing would disappear. I'm not ending anything, I said. I'm letting it run its course. Even if it ruins Ethan, it won't ruin him, I said. It'll rebuild him. When I hung up, the sky was dark and full of thunder. Across town, power flickered out in several neighborhoods. The radio reported that the storm had knocked down 2 lines near the marina. I smiled faintly. Charleston always did love its symbolism. At that same moment at the Callahan house, I imagined Madison staring at her dead phone screen, the Wi-Fi gone, the world she controlled suddenly silent. Maybe she'd finally understand what it felt like to live without control, without comfort, without illusion. The phone buzzed beside me one last time, Clara again. The media's changed its tone, she said. People are calling you a symbol of integrity. The narrative flipped overnight. Let it stay flipped, I said. And Ethan, she asked softly. He'll find me when he's ready, I said. He always does. Rain began again, steady and relentless. I stayed on the porch, the smell of wet earth rising from the garden. Across the bay, faint lights blinked through the storm. And I thought of the ballroom, 2 nights ago, how the chandeliers had glowed while I stood alone in the dark. Now the light was mine again. Not the kind you hang from ceilings, but the kind that burns quietly, from within, the kind that no one can take, not even those who mistake generosity for weakness. When the thunder faded, I whispered into the night, lesson 1's over. The next part's theirs. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the air clear not from victory, but from freedom. 2 days later, Charleston had gone quiet again. The frenzy that had filled the papers and talk shows was already fading, replaced by the next scandal, the next distraction. But beneath the calm surface, something deeper had shifted. For the first time in years, my name was being spoken not as a relic, but as a reminder of who had built the city's backbone and who had simply decorated it. I sat in my study, the morning sun cutting through the blinds. The air smelled of paper and coffee. On my desk lay a thick binder Clara had dropped off earlier that morning, full of audits, statements, and signatures that mapped every thread of ownership in the Callahan empire. I'd spent hours reading through each page, tracing how far Ethan and Madison had wandered from the truth. The call from the Charleston Business Journal came just as I finished. Mr. Callahan, the editor, said we'd like a statement about the recent events, just to clarify who owns what. I don't owe explanations, I replied. I understand, sir, but the public would. The public's already made up its mind, I said. Let them talk. They always do. When I hung up, I stared at the brown leather portfolio on the corner of my desk, the same one that had started it all. Its surface was smooth edges, worn every scratch telling a story. It had outlasted marriages, partnerships, and generations of pride. But now, it would do what it was always meant to do: protect the truth. There was a knock at the door. Clara stepped inside, her binder tucked under one arm, her expression steady. It's time, she said simply. Are they ready? They'll never be ready, she replied. But you should still do it. I nodded, standing. Then let's give them what they've earned. The boardroom at Callahan Estates looked different now. Colder, sleeker, stripped of any warmth that had once made it human. Madison's design, of course. Frosted glass silver fixtures and walls that reflected power without purpose. The long mahogany table gleamed under the recessed lights. When I entered, conversation stopped. Ethan sat near the head of the table, his tie loosened, eyes bloodshot. Madison sat beside him, poised but pale, tapping her nails against her phone screen. Linda was there too, sitting with her hands clasped tightly in her lap. A few members of the board shifted uncomfortably. The press had been invited, though they pretended otherwise, their cameras hidden behind polite smiles. I didn't sit. I placed the portfolio on the table and opened it slowly, the rustle of paper echoing in the silence. I appreciate you all coming, I said. I'll make this simple. For years I've watched the name Callahan change, meaning first from hard work to comfort, then from comfort to vanity. Today it goes back to where it belongs. Madison's voice cut through the air, cold and sharp. This is a waste of everyone's time. Whatever you think you're proving, it's not going to. I raised a hand. Quiet, Madison. The adults are speaking. A murmur rippled through the room. Her face flushed red. I took out the first document, a weathered copy of the Callahan family trust deed, stamped and notarized. This, I said, is the original structure of Callahan Estates. It clearly states that all assets, properties, and subsidiaries fall under the sole authority of the trustee. I slid it across the table toward Clara. That would be me. Ethan shifted. Dad, we know you're still technically trustee, but that's a formality. The board controls operations. Does it? I interrupted. Because according to Section 8, Paragraph 2, I hold unilateral veto power over all major financial actions, including mergers, including rebranding, including unauthorized spending on weddings. I pulled another document from the folder, Madison's corporate expense report, signed in her handwriting. $200,000 in consulting fees, I read aloud. Another $150,000 in strategic brand partnerships. Funny thing, though, none of those partners exist. The board members exchanged glances. Madison straightened in her seat. That's a private matter. Not anymore, I said. Not when company funds were used to pay for your personal vanity project. Clara stepped forward and placed a stack of printed statements on the table. We've verified every transaction. Mr. Callahan's records are accurate. Madison glared at her. You've been working for him this whole time. Clara smiled faintly. I've been working for the truth. I turned back to Ethan. Do you understand now? The empire you thought you owned, the one she flaunted in designer dresses and press interviews, it's not yours. It never was. You were borrowing my name and pretending it was your signature. He looked down at his hands, silent. I opened the final section of the binder, revealing the portfolio statements from Lawson and Banks. As of this morning, I said the trust holds total assets valued at $8.3 million. Of that, $3.2 million remains under the Victoria Callahan Educational Fund, and another $1.5 has been reallocated to internal restructuring, meaning every cent you used, every project you financed, every car and condo and headline, it all came from here. I tapped the page. From me. The room was silent. Even Madison stopped moving. Now I continued. The question isn't whether you'll apologize, it's whether you'll learn. Eleanor Hartwell, seated quietly near the back as an advisor, spoke for the first time. James Callahan was one of the most principled men I ever met, she said. He taught us that integrity outlives profit. It seems his grandson had to be reminded. Her words hit the room like a hammer. Madison's face went white. Effective immediately, I said, closing the folder. I'm reinstating the Callahan family charter. Madison Pierce will no longer hold any position within this company. Ethan Callahan will remain under supervision to rebuild what he almost destroyed. Madison shot to her feet. You can't do this. I already did, I said, my voice steady. You wanted a family empire. You forgot whose name built it. She looked around the room for support, but no one met her eyes. Even the board members who once praised her looked away. Security will escort you out, Clara said quietly. The sound of Madison's heels against the tile echoed like punctuation marks as she stormed toward the door. Ethan stood slowly, his face drained of color. Dad, he said softly, I didn't know it was this bad. You didn't want to know, I said. He nodded, once the weight of it settling on him like truth. I'll fix it. You'll earn it, I corrected. I gathered the documents and placed them back into the portfolio. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the lights. Before I left, I turned back to the table. For 30 years, this company has stood for something more than money. It stood for craftsmanship, honesty, and family. Somewhere along the way, those words got lost. I'm here to remind you they're not for sale. Then I left. Outside, the air was heavy with summer heat, but it felt lighter somehow. The reporters crowded near the door, shouting questions, snapping photos. I said nothing. The truth didn't need press coverage, it just needed witnesses. When I reached my car, Clara caught up to me. That was something, she said. It wasn't revenge, I said. It was correction. Same thing sometimes, she said. I smiled faintly. Not when you do it right. As I drove away, I saw the reflection of the building in my rearview mirror, the one I'd built with my father's hands, the one my son would now have to rebuild with his own. For the first time in months, I felt the weight of anger lift. The city skyline stretched ahead, glowing under the afternoon sun. In the distance, thunder rolled faintly across the harbor, a reminder that storms never really end. They just move farther out to sea. By the third morning after the board meeting, Charleston had transformed my silence into a headline again. Cafes buzzed with talk about the old man who took his empire back, and the city's gossip pages called it poetic justice. I walked downtown that morning just to see how it all felt. People I hadn't spoken to in years nodded respectfully when I passed. Some smiled, some whispered. A few even stopped to shake my hand. The Charleston Gazette ran a full-page photo of me outside the Callahan Tower with the caption, "Integrity Restored." Beneath it, a smaller line read, "Richard Callahan takes back control after a decade of silence." I didn't care for the drama of it. I'd never wanted to be famous again. But I understood why it mattered to them. In a world that had forgotten where decency ended and power began, people needed to believe that something pure still had teeth. Across town, Madison's world was unraveling. The tabloids had shifted from praising her ambition to dissecting her downfall. Photos of her leaving the building after the meeting were everywhere. Her hair undone, her eyes swollen. Social media, the same machine she'd used to build her image, now tore it apart piece by piece. Charleston bride turns corporate villain. The Queen of Callahan falls from her throne. Even her so-called friends were vanishing. The same women who once drank her champagne now ghosted her calls. At my kitchen table, Clara dropped a folder of clippings and reports. "They're turning on her faster than I expected," she said. I poured her a coffee. That's how paper crowns burn, fast and bright. She tried to withdraw from the trust again, Clara added. The bank rejected her outright this time. She's furious. She'll run out of fury eventually, I said. All emotions do when they stop being useful. Outside, thunderheads rolled over the harbor again. Charleston loved its symmetry. Storms always came back when stories did. Meanwhile, Ethan had been quiet. He hadn't returned my calls since the board meeting, but Clara said he'd been at the construction site every morning, working without fanfare, wearing the same gray shirt and hard hat. No press, no entourage, just labor. That was enough for me. When he finally called, his voice was calmer. "Dad, can we meet always?" I said. We met at the site the next day. He looked different, tired, yes, but grounded. The kind of tired that comes from work, not worry. The building behind him was half finished, steel ribs rising against the morning sky. "I came to apologize," he said simply. "You already did," I said. "Not properly," he replied. "You were right. I didn't want to know the truth. Madison made it easy to live blind. I wanted to believe success meant something different now, that it didn't need sacrifice." I nodded. "Success without sacrifice is just decoration." He smiled faintly, eyes wet. "You sound like Grandpa." "He'd take that as a compliment," I said. "So will I." We stood in silence for a while, watching workers move beams into place. "She left," he said finally. "Packed up last night. No note, no fight. Just gone." "Good," I said. "Now you can start over." He nodded, looking down at his hands. "What do I do now?" "Build," I said. "Not to prove something, just to build." That night I poured myself a drink and watched the evening news. The anchor's voice filled the room. Sources confirm that Madison Pierce has resigned from all remaining Callahan partnerships. Legal teams report that no criminal charges will be filed. No charges. I'd made sure of that. Mercy wasn't weakness. It was choice. A segment followed showing Ethan at the site shaking hands with the crew. Rebuilding his father's legacy, the reporter said. Quietly, humbly. For the first time in years, I felt proud not because he looked strong, but because he finally looked real. Linda called the next day. "He's different," she said. "I saw him this morning. He asked me how I was. He hasn't done that since college." "Good," I said. "That means he's learning." There was a pause. "Rick," she said softly, "you did the right thing, even if it broke him for a while. Sometimes things have to break to be rebuilt properly. You always did believe in rebuilding. It's the only thing worth doing," I said. That afternoon, the city called. The mayor wanted to honor me with some kind of integrity award. I declined politely. If they want to thank me, I told the assistant they can build homes that last longer than press releases. I turned off my phone and went for a walk instead. The harbor was quiet waves brushing the rocks like an old song. A few people waved when they recognized me. I nodded back, but my thoughts were elsewhere, on Ethan, on my father, on the strange way time repeats its lessons until someone finally listens. As evening fell, I drove past the old country club. Through the windows, I could still see the ballroom lights shining, but the magic was gone. The place looked hollow now, all gold and emptiness. I parked for a moment and sat there, remembering the laughter, the humiliation, the silence that had started it all. From that silence had come everything: clarity, control, even forgiveness. The next morning, a reporter from the Journal called again. "Mr. Callahan, would you give us one quote for the record, just one?" I asked. "Yes, sir. Just one line about what you've learned." I thought for a moment, then said, "Respect isn't inherited. It's earned. And sometimes earned the hard way." They printed it the next day in bold letters across the business section. People called it wisdom. I called it memory. Later that week, Linda visited with a small box. Inside was the old pocket watch I'd given Ethan years ago. The inscription glimmered faintly under the light, "Honor builds forever." "He wanted you to have it back," she said. "Said he's not done earning it yet." I closed my hand around the watch and smiled. Then he's finally my son again. As she left, I sat in the quiet, the ticking of the watch filling the room. The sound was steady grounding, alive. Time hadn't taken my family, it had just tested it. That evening, I attended a small charity gala downtown. Nothing fancy, no photographers, no speeches. Just people who cared about building homes for veterans and workers. The host saw me in the crowd and asked if I'd say a few words. I stood slowly, holding the microphone loosely. "We all build something," I began. "Some of us build houses, some build names. But what we build doesn't matter as much as how we build it. Integrity is mortar. Lose that, and everything else falls." When I finished, the room was quiet for a beat, then warm applause filled the air. I spotted Ethan near the back of the room, clapping quietly, his eyes steady on mine. No pride this time, just respect. Afterward, he approached me outside under the soft glow of streetlights. "You didn't tell me you were speaking," he said. "I didn't know I would," I replied. "You sounded like Grandpa again," he said with a smile. "Good," I said. "He'd have liked tonight." Ethan nodded. "He would have liked you too." We stood there for a long time, father and son. No need for more words. The city lights shimmered on the water, reflecting everything that had been broken, rebuilt, and made right again. When I drove home, the road was empty, the air clean. I glanced at the pocket watch on the seat beside me, its faint ticking matching the rhythm of the engine. Justice, I realized, wasn't about punishment. It was about timing. And mine had been perfect. The summer heat came early that year, heavy and bright, clinging to everything it touched. By June, the city had moved on from the Callahan scandal. New headlines filled the papers, new stories replaced old outrage. But in the quiet corners of Charleston, the job sites, the small cafes, the families who lived in houses we'd built, people still nodded when they heard my name. Respect has a longer life than gossip. Every morning I drove to the construction site on King Street. The smell of sawdust and steel was something I hadn't realized I missed. I walked the perimeter with my coffee, nodding to the men as they worked. They didn't flinch or stop talking when I passed. They just smiled and said, "Morning, Mr. Callahan." Ethan was there too. He'd been showing up every day since the boardroom reckoning, wearing a plain shirt and jeans, his hair always messy from the wind. No office, no fancy title, just work. I never told him to do it. I didn't have to. One afternoon, I found him sitting on a stack of plywood, sketching something on a notepad. The sun hit his face, and for a moment, he looked 10 years old again, the boy who used to sit at my drafting table asking how walls stayed up. "What's that?" I asked. "A community center," he said without looking up, "for veterans and low-income families. I'm calling it the Callahan Integrity Center." I studied him. "Good name." He smiled faintly. "I borrowed it from you. We didn't need to say more." The wind carried the sound of hammers and the low hum of a generator. The foundation was taking shape, a literal and symbolic rebuild of everything we'd almost lost. When he stood, he handed me the drawing. "It's not perfect yet." "It doesn't have to be," I said. "It just has to stand." That night I sat on the porch with a glass of bourbon. The crickets were loud, the sky cloudless, stars burning through the humidity. Clara called to check in. "Site looks good," she said. "Ethan's got the crew wrapped around his finger. They actually like him." "Hard not to like someone when they're finally worth it," I said. "You going to tell him about the fund transfer?" "Not yet." "Let him earn it first." She paused. "You're proud of him, aren't you?" I looked out over the quiet yard. "Proud isn't the word. Relieved, maybe." Clara laughed softly. "You know, Rick, you could retire for real this time." "I could," I said. "But I'd just end up rebuilding something else." She knew better than to argue. "You always do." 3 days later, Madison left Charleston. There was no announcement, no statement. Just a moving truck and an empty condo. Someone at the office told me she'd gone north to live with her sister. I didn't celebrate it. I didn't need to. Her absence was enough. But before she disappeared, she left a letter with Clara sealed in a plain envelope. I didn't open it for a week. When I finally did, her handwriting surprised me. Delicate, deliberate. "Mr. Callahan, I used to think power meant control. You showed me it means character. I don't expect forgiveness, but I understand now what you were protecting. I built my success on borrowed ground, and you let me fall so I could see it. I won't forget that." Madison, I folded the letter and placed it in my portfolio. Not as proof, but as closure. The next morning, Ethan invited me to the site again. "We're doing a barbecue," he said. "Crew wants you there." When I arrived, smoke and laughter filled the air. The men had rigged up an old grill on the back of a pickup truck. Someone played country music from a radio balanced on a paint can. It felt honest, something I hadn't felt in years. One of the workers, an older man with gray hair and calloused hands, handed me a paper plate. "You built this company, sir," he said. "Now your boy's building it again. Must feel good." "It feels right," I said. Later, Ethan stood up with a plaque in his hand. It was a piece of reclaimed wood, rough but clean, with words burned into the surface, for teaching us that legacy is built, not inherited. He handed it to me. "The guys made it," he said. I ran my fingers over the words. The edges were still warm from the burn. "You didn't have to." "I know," he said. "That's why it means something." We ate, laughed, talked about projects and small-town gossip. The crew left one by one until only Ethan and I remained. The sun dipped low, the sky turning amber. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the pocket watch, the one I'd given him years ago. "It belongs to you," he said, offering it to me. "No," I said. "You've earned it." He looked at me for a long moment. "Then I'll keep it running. That's all I ever wanted," I said. When I got home that night, I found myself thinking of my father again. I remembered sitting beside him as a boy while he worked on blueprints by lamplight, his voice calm and steady. A strong foundation can hold anything, even mistakes. I poured another drink and whispered, "You were right." 2 weeks later, the Integrity Center broke ground, officially. The mayor attended the ceremony, shaking Ethan's hand for the cameras. I stood off to the side out of the spotlight, watching my son deliver his first public speech that wasn't written by someone else. "This building," he said, isn't about business. It's about second chances. My father taught me that success means nothing without integrity. This project is my way of saying I finally listened. The applause was genuine. I didn't clap. I just watched. That evening, he stopped by my house. "They offered to name the main hall after you," he said. I shook my head. "Name it after the men who built it." He smiled. "Already did. But there's one corner we saved. I put a quote there instead. Something you said once." "Oh." He pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "It says, 'Integrity isn't inherited. It's learned the hard way.'" I stared at the words, unable to speak. He laughed softly. "You didn't think I read the paper, did you?" I smiled. "Guess I underestimated you." When he left, the house felt quiet again. But it wasn't the lonely quiet anymore. It was the kind that follows completion. That night, I sat at my desk and wrote something I hadn't written in years, a letter for the trust, updating its provisions. To my son, Ethan Callahan. "When you are ready, this trust and all its responsibilities will be yours. Not because you inherited it, but because you learned what it costs to earn it. Dad." I sealed the letter and placed it in the portfolio beside Madison's. One ending, one beginning. Outside, the night was still. Somewhere downtown, the sound of construction echoed faintly, Ethan's crew working late under floodlights. I imagined him standing there, hands on his hips, giving orders with quiet confidence. The world had come full circle. I had built a company, a legacy, a family, and nearly lost it all. But in losing it, I'd found the one thing worth keeping. When I finally went to bed, I didn't dream of revenge or justice or even forgiveness. I dreamed of hammers striking steel, of walls rising straight and true of a foundation built to last. And when morning came, I woke not as the man they once humiliated, but as the man who taught them all how to build again. Spring came early the following year. The magnolia trees bloomed like snow clouds above the streets, their white petals falling into gutters where new buildings rose from the bones of old ones. Charleston always knew how to rebuild, and maybe that's why I'd never been able to leave it. I drove slowly past the King Street site one morning, windows down, the smell of wet cement filling the air. The Callahan Integrity Center stood tall now, brick and glass, clean lines, honest work. The sign out front read, "Opening soon, a place for growth and gratitude." I parked across the street and stepped out, watching as Ethan walked the perimeter with a clipboard, talking with foremen, laughing easily. For months now, he had carried the company on his shoulders, not as an heir, but as a builder. I'd seen him come home at midnight, covered in dust, shirt sticking to his back, hands blistered. He never complained. That was how I knew he'd changed. He saw me from across the yard and waved. "You're early," he said as I walked up. "Habit," I said. "I used to show up before sunrise just to hear the quiet before the noise." He smiled. "You'd hate it now. Too many moving parts." I looked around. "Looks solid." "It will be," he said. "We're almost there." He paused, glancing toward the entrance. "You should come to the opening next month. I wouldn't miss it." He hesitated, then added, "I'm naming the main hall after you." I shook my head immediately. "Don't. Dad, name it after the workers who built it. The men and women who earned the sweat in the walls. I've had enough names carved in stone to last me." Ethan studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. We'll call it the Builder's Pavilion." Now that I said sounds right. The wind picked up, carrying dust across the site. A few workers stopped to nod as they passed, and I caught the glint of pride in their eyes. It wasn't the kind reserved for bosses or owners. It was the kind people gave to someone who had once stood where they stood. After a few minutes, I left him to his work. There was something satisfying about watching your own lessons walk around in another man's skin. At home, Clara waited on my porch with a manila envelope. "You still hate doorbells," I said. "They're for people who need permission to knock," she replied, handing me the envelope. "Final audit. The books are clean, the trust's in perfect shape." I flipped through the papers briefly. "And Ethan. He's earned every signature," she said. "You could hand him everything tomorrow, and it wouldn't shake him." I looked out across the street where children rode their bikes under blooming trees. "That's the goal, isn't it?" Clara smiled. "You've finally done it, Rick. Built something that doesn't need you." Inside, we sat by the window as the light shifted through the blinds. "I'll sign the transfer this month," I said. "But I'll keep oversight until he doesn't need even that." "Spoken like a man who's afraid to retire," she teased. "Maybe," I said, "but I've seen what happens when people confuse comfort for purpose." She laughed. "I'll make sure the paperwork doesn't confuse either." That evening, I opened an old drawer in my study. Beneath stacks of forgotten files and a tarnished compass lay a folded piece of yellow paper, my father's first blueprint for our family business. The paper was soft, the edges nearly falling apart. In his neat handwriting were the words I'd nearly forgotten: "Build something worth remembering." I sat for a long time just staring at it. Then I took out my pen and wrote underneath, "And teach someone to remember it." The following week, Ethan invited me to dinner. Linda joined us, bringing her quiet smile and a homemade pie that tasted exactly like it had 20 years ago. We ate at my house, just the three of us, laughter filling the rooms that once echoed with silence. At the end of the meal, Ethan raised his glass. "To Dad," he said. "For building the lessons we were too proud to learn the first time." I lifted my own glass, though my throat felt tight. "2 second chances," I said. Linda added softly, "and to the man who never stopped believing they existed." We drank. No one said much after that. We didn't need to. When the dishes were cleared and the night grew still, I stepped out onto the porch with Clara, who'd stopped by to drop off one last document. "He's ready," she said simply. "I know." "So what's next for you?" I looked out over the neighborhood, the skyline glowing in the distance. "I'm thinking about letting the city breathe without me for a while." She smiled. "Letting go suits you." "Doesn't feel like letting go," I said. "Feels like handing off the hammer." The next morning, Ethan came to my study before heading to work. He found me sorting through files, preparing the trust documents. "What's all this?" he asked. "It's time," I said, sliding a single sheet toward him. The header read, "Callahan Legacy Agreement." "This is the last transfer. The trust, the assets, the authority, it all goes to you. I'll still oversee, but it's your foundation now." He stared at the paper, emotion flickering across his face. "I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," I said. "Just keep it standing." He nodded slowly, then took out the pocket watch from his jacket. "Before I sign this, I want you to have this back." I shook my head. "You know I don't want it." He smiled faintly. "Then consider this an exchange." I took the watch, turning it in my hand. Inside, the old engraving still caught the light, "Honor builds forever." But now, there was something new beneath it. Tiny letters freshly etched. "Integrity builds again." "You had this added?" I asked quietly. He nodded. "You were right. Legacy isn't what we inherit, it's what we fix when it breaks." I felt my chest tighten, the kind of ache that doesn't hurt but still makes you breathe slower. "Then I guess you've earned the trust." He signed the document carefully, his name strong and steady beneath mine. When he finished, he handed me the pen. "You're still my partner," he said. "No," I said, smiling. "Now I'm just your witness." We shook hands, firm, equal, final. That afternoon, the news broke quietly. Ethan Callahan, named sole trustee of Callahan Family Holdings. There were no headlines, no scandals, just a few polite mentions. I didn't mind. The best stories don't need an audience. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and watched the city lights shimmer. Across the bay, I could see the faint outline of the Integrity Center's roof catching the moonlight. Somewhere inside, workers were putting on the final touches, Ethan's touches. For a long time, I listened to the sound of crickets and the soft ticking of the pocket watch beside me. Then I whispered, "You did it, son." The air was cool, carrying the scent of magnolias. I leaned back, letting the night settle around me. Tomorrow would come like every other day, but it wouldn't belong to me anymore. It would belong to him, and to the people who would walk into that building and find something better than wealth, something solid. Legacy, I thought, isn't about walls. It's about windows, letting light through long after you've stepped away. And as the first hint of dawn touched the horizon, I smiled, knowing the old man's work was finally done. A year passes faster than you think when peace finally feels earned. Charleston has changed again, as it always does, but this time I don't feel the need to chase it. I spend most mornings on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over the harbor. The skyline gleams with buildings my family built, each one a reminder that time, like construction, is just patience made visible. The papers don't mention my name anymore, and that's exactly how I like it. The headlines belong to Ethan now. The Callahan Integrity Center opens to record attendance. Ethan Callahan named Businessman of the Year. Each article talks about innovation, community, and character. They never mention the storm that came before, and that's fine. Some storms only matter because they clean the air. The morning of the center's grand opening, Ethan stopped by my house before the ceremony. "You coming?" he asked, straightening his tie in the mirror. "I thought I'd let you have your moment." He smiled. "It's not just mine, it's ours." I followed him downtown, the city glittering in early light. When we arrived, the parking lot was full. Reporters lined the entrance, cameras flashing as Ethan shook hands with officials. I hung back, content to watch from a distance. The Callahan Integrity Center stood tall in graceful glass panels gleaming like clean water. Its foundation as steady as the lesson it was built on. Inside, the main hall was crowded. I recognized workers, community leaders, even a few faces I hadn't seen since the old days. A plaque near the entrance caught my eye. The Builders' Pavilion, dedicated to those who shaped with their hands, their hearts, and their honesty. I smiled. That was Ethan's touch, not mine. He had learned the right kind of pride, the quiet kind that doesn't need an audience. When the speeches began, I stayed in the back, leaning against a column. Ethan took the stage, and for a moment, I saw the boy he used to be standing on a stool beside me, pretending to hold a hammer. He adjusted the microphone, looked out over the crowd, and began. "My father used to tell me that buildings remember the men who build them," he said, "and that integrity once lost takes longer to rebuild than any wall. A year ago, I thought legacy was something you inherited. Now I know it's something you earn." The crowd listened closely. He went on, thanking his team, his mentors, and finally his voice catching slightly his father. "He taught me the hardest lesson a man can learn, that failure doesn't define you unless you stop learning from it. Everything you see here today exists because of that lesson." Applause filled the room, steady and sincere. I didn't clap. I just watched. There was nothing left to add. Afterward, Ethan found me sitting on a bench outside beneath the magnolia trees that lined the courtyard. The wind carried the faint sound of music from inside, soft and warm. "I saw you in there," he said, sitting beside me. "You were hard to miss," I said. He smiled. "You didn't clap?" "I did," I said, just quietly. He looked down at his hands, then back up at the building. "I wanted to thank you for letting me fail first. That was the only way you were ever going to succeed," I said. We sat in silence for a moment, watching a group of kids run across the courtyard. "What about you?" he asked finally. "What's next?" I thought about it for a while. "Maybe I'll start teaching again," I said. "Not construction, just lessons that don't need blueprints." He nodded slowly. "You've earned the rest." "Rest," I chuckled. "No. Just a different kind of work." Before he left, he reached into his jacket and handed me something small and heavy. The pocket watch. I opened it carefully. The old engraving, "Honor builds forever," was still there, but beneath it was a new line, "Integrity begins again." "You added this?" I asked. He nodded. "Every story needs a second chapter." I slipped it into my pocket. "Then keep time for both of us." When he walked away, I stayed a little longer, listening to the laughter echo through the courtyard. The center gleamed under the afternoon sun windows, catching light like ripples on water. For the first time in years, the city felt young again. That night I drove through Charleston's quiet streets. The world looked softer now, more forgiving. Every corner, every building carried a piece of me, but none of them belonged to me anymore. That was the beauty of it. Legacy only matters when you let it breathe without you. At home, I sat in my study and opened the old leather portfolio one last time. Inside were the documents that had once defined my life: contracts, ownership papers, trust agreements. I ran a hand over the signatures, then closed it for good. The work was done. I stepped out onto the porch. The night air smelled of salt and magnolia the same way it had the day I first picked up a hammer. Above me, the stars stretched clear and steady. I thought about everything that had happened: the humiliation, the silence, the fall, the rebuild. It all led here. A man can spend a lifetime building things, but the most important structure he'll ever create is the one inside himself. Somewhere in the distance, the Integrity Center lights flickered off one by one. I smiled, whispering, "Good night, Charleston." The watch in my pocket ticked softly, steady as a heartbeat. Time moves on, but the foundation remains. If you've listened this far, maybe you understand that revenge isn't the end of a story. It's just the part that makes you strong enough to write the next one. If you've ever lost something and rebuilt it, if you've ever turned pain into purpose, then you already know what this story was really about. Tell me what you would build if you had the chance to start again. Leave it in the comments. I read every one. Because maybe your story starts where mine ends. And if you believe, like I do, that second chances build stronger foundations than revenge ever could stay with us, there are more stories waiting to be told. Stories about family forgiveness and the kind of justice that makes peace instead of scars. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next story. Until then, keep building.